Good morning, everyone. My name is Keith Wayland from RPI Consultants. I'm here with Ms. Stephanie Kowal. You're attending a presentation on 10 loss and supply chain projects for Christmas. Very excited about this project today. We have, once again, Stephanie Kowal, our supply chain practice manager, and myself. It's very exciting for me because the way you look smart is by presenting with Stephanie. So, yay for Keith. All right.
Yeah, so a little bit about us. We've been around since 1999. We have about 60 plus consultants with us, specializing everything from supply chain, HR, financials on the tech side, and we also have a imaging practice as well. So our number one, we're going to kick this off with MSCM. So here we have par counting, cycle counting, and receiving and delivery. So, if you haven't implemented MSCM yet, it's fairly low effort to implement.
Totally.
And you can implement it in pieces. So you can start off by utilizing the par counting feature out in your materials areas to help make their replenishment process more efficient, straightforward, minimize the paperwork that's required today if you're using any kind of paper processes. That can be really helpful. And then also cycle counting. So if you have some perpetual inventories today, you may be doing all that on paper, which takes a lot of time. You're there all Saturday through the weekend going through all those counts. So by utilizing a handheld to freeze your inventory and scan a barcode instead can really speed up that process. And then for receiving and delivery, this is really cool. You use the handhelds to
like a UPS guy.
Yeah, exactly. And you even can be as advanced to use your employee badges. If you have a barcode on there, you can build that into a MSCM recipient table, and it will know who the name is that signed for that package. So signatures, when they're sloppy writing it down, you can just use their badge instead and connect the dots. So really helpful.
And barcoding is also a key component of doing the automating the part counts too, right? Making it just real easy to just point, click, and move on. It'll greatly increase the efficiencies of folks moving around, make them a lot happier.
Exactly.
So
the cost of the handhelds can be high.
Like $1,200, ballparkish.
Yeah. And Infor does have some label functionality available using zebra printers, but you don't necessarily need to use the MSCM label print functionality. Right. You can customize it, but you also can go the $35 software route for My Label Designer and use that instead. We've also had customers utilize Crystal Reports to automate those labels as well. So pretty cool.
Right, because the barcoding it's a standard format, really. So anything that can produce that, you can make it work with.
Exactly.
I'll point out that on cycle counting, that's probably the one that I've seen deployed the least, but lots of success stories there in terms of breaking up that physical inventory and reducing the variance of it very significantly by as much as 50%. It's kind of a nice thing, right? You're sort of breaking it down and you're taking away from that once a year financial hit for what it's off by. So
exactly.
And a lot of these projects, maybe when you first set up MSCM and you're doing the first install, you're probably going to want a little help, a little support at least. Some of these, we go in and do all the setup and training, but some we just provide guidance. But once you have one of these components running, the other ones you could almost do internally. They're not that big of a project. Yeah,
and they're really big wins. So you may have physical inventory twice a year, and by implementing these cycle counts, you can then eliminate the need to have those twice a year inventories if you can keep up with the cycle
party.
Yeah, exactly. So all of that information is tracked in the system. So really nice application. I really like it.
Number 2.
Master your data.
Yes.
So auditing is huge in Lawson. If you have version 9 today, there's a place here where you can turn on auditing of your master files. In version 9, it is just for your item master and your item location, also including the item source. But in version 10, most exciting, you have so many more audit screens available here. So you can audit any changes to your IC categories, to your PO vendor item, to your requester. Not only can you track what's happening in your system, you also can build some sort of KPIs behind that too, to go how many changes are being made, throughout the day or throughout the month. This really helps keep track and helps you master that information, because you can see who changed it when and find some breakdowns.
Who keeps changing it back?
Yes.
Now I know.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things that happens is you do have to give access to a lot of people for these forms. You want to empower them. It's just nice to know, who's making those updates, potentially not in the direction the organization's trying to go.
Exactly. And you may be utilizing things like Nuvia or data links, to help manage your item master files. And again, you may have some sort of outside process that's then interfacing into your item master. So, having a little bit of control there can be really helpful.
And if it's interfacing, then that gets tagged as whatever is tied to the interface. So you can also see that that's the source of the update. Exactly.
Yep. Really, really helpful. And then there's also some additional audit screens available as part of the procurement setup. So this is where you would turn on auditing of your PO company setup, any agreement changes, so any price changes. So I know that was really huge in the upgrade as well. In version 9.
They didn't have that?
No.
I didn't know.
No, you're able to track.
Who creates the agreement?
Yep, and also what the last price was, if it was changed, but not the price before that. And it's not well audited in 9, but it is in 10. So really exciting.
We keep on covering nice things about 10
along
the way. So that's always positive. Number 3, the number 3 project that every supply chain department should look at for Christmas: clean up your junk. I think one of the things that happens in any organization is that we tend to maintain the things that have drivers, right? So if I'm a department and I request something and I don't get it, I'm calling up and I'm saying, hey, where's my stuff? And maybe that RQ record somehow got orphaned or lost. Maybe that PO is still open. Maybe it didn't get issued. That drives resolution. From a payment perspective, the vendor drivers, they want to get paid for their goods, and they're gonna have processes in place to follow up. But there's a lot that can get lost in the shuffle there, where once the department has those goods and that vendor is paid, the supplier is paid, and those things are satisfied, we may not focus on some of the things that are out there. And that can leave open PO lines, open service lines, we'll talk about all these in a second, open R&I, and it can accumulate over long periods of time, right? And one of the things that we've seen a lot is departments that essentially, they can't even think of running an open PO report because it's so ridiculous, all that's on it. And an open PO report is based on the purchase order header being closed. So if you have any of the lines that aren't closed, if there's any mismatch on the count of the lines that it thinks are closed, then it's going to stay open. Similarly, R&I then has a bigger impact. That eventually does get your finance department to question, why is this in there? So I would say this is a project that can be broken down into pieces, and where you can do sort of that 80-20, where it's like 80% of your open PO lines you can query, upload or cancel. Maybe some will error out, but they'll just work, right? And you can start there, and then you can start attacking. Whenever you get into older transactions in Lawson, you can always run into some issues with the date and the timing. But there's a lot of information out there for how to deal with those. And there's always, eventually you can just go straight to the database tables if you need to. Similarly for R&I, there's a lot of archiving programs that'll take care of most of your R&I. I would say pick a date. Maybe it's far into the past if you feel like there might be some legitimate stuff out there, but a year out, and say, I'm going to close all this stuff and I'm going to deal with any exceptions that come. Like if there's literally an open PO from 2 years ago that arrives at your door today, then I think it's completely fine for that to be a total exception and that PO not to be open, and it's worth closing all the others. And I think one of the important things is it's a maintenance thing on the system. Not that I know a lot about medicine, but in medicine they have this concept of how well you take care of your teeth and your feet, it affects your whole body. It's like that in the Lawson system. The more junk you have in your PO lines, the worse your R&I looks, and so forth. So it's just about being a healthy checkup.
And also in version 10, there's some additional reports that can be used outside of what we have listed here. There's a new report called IC 216 that can be used to report on open transactions when you're trying to change units of measure.
Nice.
So that can be really helpful as well, instead of having all of these kind of custom
Mismatch.
queries built to try to find this information. That helps take the thinking out of some of that.
And then tell us about this vendor agreement purge.
Yeah, so PO 300 can be used to purge some of your agreements. So if you've had Lawson for several years now, you may have a lot of PO 25 agreements that have now expired or are no longer in use, and your buyers viewing PO 28, it's this excessive log of all of these agreements that don't really matter anymore. Maybe you're referring to them, but not an agreement from 6 years ago, right? So using this agreement purge helps clear that out. You can still have an archive of it, but then it's just really making sure the data that you have in your system is up to date and the most accurate detail there. And that can also speed up a lot of your queries as well. Just,
Yeah, completely, right?
only having what you need in the system there.
All right, cool. Number 4.
Leverage the EDI.
Yes.
Okay, so EDI is definitely not adopted overnight. You may have implemented purchase orders many years ago. You're still waiting on invoices. Stop waiting. Really, those are great projects and are really split up by vendor, right? So really taking some time to focus on your top vendors, run a report to see who you're doing the most business with, and work with partners like GHX to start implementing those other transaction
Great option,
sets.
GHX, yeah.
Yeah, and I really like 855s. I think they're really, really helpful. They're really, really easy to turn on and configure.
Confirmations, right?
Yep,
We're talking about confirmations.
Exactly, sorry. Confirmations.
Yes, confirmations.
And then you can utilize PO 122 to bring all of that confirmation detail into the system. So by using PO 122, that will write to your revision table. So gives a lot of information to the buyer to view in PO 66 to see when it was acknowledged, when that 855 came in, without having to log into GHX or find
Yes.
additional information. And most importantly, you can report on it. So you can
Yes.
utilize that information that was written to PO revision and then go, how many purchase orders do I have that haven't been confirmed yet, and follow up on those.
Yeah, and whom? Whose
Yeah.
are they, right? So I think EDI, it's surprising sometimes that you go into organizations not deployed, especially on the PO side. I think sometimes it looks like, hey, that's older technology, but it's older technology that works, right? It's a baseline for electronic communication. On the invoice side, I think it's really important what you said about focusing on top vendors, because there is some level of maintenance to it. And if you have a vendor that's getting 5 invoices a month, it's really not worth it, right? This isn't about let's get as many vendors as we can. It's about let's get volume vendors. And when EDI transactions come in, anybody that's out there that's worked them, it's not a perfect system, right? They're not all going to come in. But when you look at the time savings of having to deal with exceptions, it is very, very, very significant. So, I think there's tremendous opportunity for any AP department. Your top 5 vendors. You can probably reduce the entry time on those by a factor of about 3 to 1, if not more.
Yeah, and even if you have all of these transaction sets already implemented, it can be hard to manage that information. ED10 and ED40, they're kind of clunky screens, for lack of a better word, and trying to manage that and make sure that you have the right setup there is really tough. You need an expert to do it. that's someone that is really just focusing on EDI transactions and gets the ins and outs. What we've been able to do with some customers is leverage AP 10 for the account number information to tie that to ED40 a little bit easier, so that you can build some reports to associate the two setup screens.
So that people know which one belongs where? Is
Exactly. Yeah, so it doesn't work for everyone, really depending on how you utilize AP10 and AP10.2, but really be creative, because you have to find a better way to manage that setup, because it can be really easy to get lost in a setup. So how many character spaces are needed? Try to build that into a report so that if there's a character space that's off, put it in an exception report. Don't wait for that actual exception to happen in the system. So, just thinking creatively on some solutions to help manage that process. 5.
Number 5. I'm trying to remember what all these were, so I'm excited to see them each time too.
Replacement items.
Yay!
How exciting. So this is actually available in 9, but our screen print here is for version 10. And there's this field here that says replacement item. And if you're already utilizing this, I believe it was in 9.0.1.15, they added some dates here that are available. So what replacement items do is, let's say you have an item in inventory and it's temporarily on back order, and you have another item in stock that it's a perfectly good substitute. So what Lawson will do is, if you have a replacement item here and you have these dates either open or they are within the range, if this original item here, 111083, is out of stock, there's nothing on hand, it's going to automatically replace it on the requisition with this replacement item. So the requester doesn't even need to think about it. In RQC, it just automatically replaces it. So it really helps that process be more efficient. Also, if you're converting to a new product and the requester hasn't quite gotten used to it yet,
this is a nice way to get that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a couple caveats. It has to be the same stock unit of measure. So let's say the replacement item is built as each, and this one has a stock unit of measure of roll. It's not going to let you add that as a replacement item. So I really like this. I feel it works a lot easier than the IC13 substitute or complementary item setup, because for a good amount of time, and I think they fixed this in the latest version, but those IC13 items weren't showing up in Requisition Center. So you would see an alert message in RQ10 if you were using it, but you would have to drill around a lot to find other items that could be ordered instead of that one item. It just wasn't really visible for the requester. So I think this is really exciting, and I would definitely recommend looking into utilizing this at your organization.
Is this one of the ones where, like, at least from the vendor side, we used to do, the description would be like, no longer active, use this other one, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Yes.
6.
Number 6, what could it be?
Big Christmas bonus, RQC.
RQC.
Very, very exciting. So if you're not already using RQC, please do.
What are you waiting for?
Yeah, it's fairly low effort to implement. You can do this on your own. You can do it very simply by just allowing requesters to just order from your inventory, or just allowing a subset of users to order specials or services through your system. It really helps streamline that process without having to use a paper or having to train a user on how to utilize Lawson. So, again, RQ10, some of the Lawson forms can be a little bit clunky to just an everyday user. Where RQC, it has this nice user interface for the requester. It's not as good as Amazon per se, but it has specific fields. It looks a lot nicer.
More user-friendly in general.
Yeah, they don't need to worry about adding a header and then adding lines. So that's pretty exciting. You can leverage process automation to build some approvals around those requisitions. So that's something cool that you can do. And what we really like is procurement punch out from Infor. So let's say for certain items, you may not have them built in your item master. They're not in your catalog. It would be really excessive for, let's say, clinical engineering to have all of their parts, or environmental services to have all of the MOPS and all of those items built in your item master. So punch out, you can work with the vendor to have them manage that information. So you basically configure this and you punch out to the vendor's website. It has all of the catalog items that you've allowed to be in that catalog. It has your contract pricing for the vendor. And then you select those items, add them to your cart, and then you go to submit cart. And from there, it tells the requester it's going right back into Requisition Center. So from there, it's going to utilize any kind of approvals that you already have built in the system, all of your accounting information. It's all right there at your
So yeah, I mean, so it's leveraging the vendor to maintain essentially your item file, right? The customer item file is going to have the rich content that the vendor has built out with their stuff. And very commonly used in healthcare, obviously, but outside of healthcare, I think of two things. I think of things like office supplies, where it's high volume, wide selection, low dollars. You don't want to put in 60,000 items that you're contracted that you can buy from Office Max at special pricing. And the other one I think of is things like CDW, where we have IT supplies. I mean, laptops, the specs change and the pricing changes constantly. And so maintaining that is a very inefficient thing to do in an item master, but it'd be nice to have. It's nice to have a contract negotiated with these vendors. And this is a way to try to leverage that contract.
Yeah, absolutely. So Keith mentioned a bunch of vendors that Infor has approved. There's about 30 different vendors that they have on their list that you can find on through a knowledge base article. But basically, you can work with any vendor that has a XML website.
Approved means that there's pre-built interfacing, that has been done, right?
Yes. And that Infor...
Not approved doesn't mean that it's not supported.
Yes.
It just means it's a little bit of extra work, and that the vendor needs to have certain flexibility. Yes.
Yep,
yeah.
Absolutely. Also, as part of Requisition Center is this little handy bookmark area for receiving self-service. So you can enable your receivers to use RSS for receiving instead of PO30. So again, just a different user interface, a different way of going about the receipt. Just makes it a little bit easier. It looks a lot nicer. So utilizing RSS can be really helpful in instances where it's going out to area that doesn't have a receiving staff member. They're not, again, familiar with PO30 and adding a header or line detail. So taking some of the thinking out of it, making it a little bit nicer looking for them. Definitely recommend exploring RSS a little bit more. Another area that I find really, really exciting is requisition status. So this is also a bookmark that's built within the Requisition Center bookmark area. And this enables the requester to find out information about requisitions that they have open in the system, or perhaps have been closed and they want to go back and find some more detail. What I really like is it empowers them to find this information on their own without having to go through a buyer. So in this screen print here, this is requisition status, but there's also line status if you wanted to go into that much detail. There's some icons here, and one of them is actually a org chart, looks like a stack of boxes. And if you hover your mouse over it, if you have IPA approvals built in, it will let you know who's approved it. It gives you a name and a date stamp. If it's been rejected, certain areas it will actually show up in red and say rejected there. But another area that I really like is this paper button, which is details. And here, if a purchase order number has been generated, that will display here. And anything that is in blue here is actually a hyperlink to additional data. So they can click on that PO number and then drill into any kind of comments. So if the buyer is entering comments with a confirmation number or anything like that, they can find that themselves here. So really cool. And then we also have some imaging integration. Yeah, so this really goes two ways. So number one, you can build item images.
Rich content. This is what they mean by rich content.
Yes.
Pictures.
This helps your requesters. So,
Yes.
What's that thingamajig? I'm looking for, it's blue, I know it's blue.
Yes.
Here you can build this in a couple different ways. You can share or save the file to your server and then associate that link as part of the setup. This is all done in IC11 for attachments. We've also seen some organizations use the actual vendor's website for the URL. Which can be helpful, but just know that it can break. It can link to a different item or no longer work. So you really can break this up. You can start as simple as all of our inventory items we're going to make sure that we have pictures for, but non-stocks and specials, it's not really realistic to have all that built.
So I think one of the things, like for laymen like me, it seems very intimidating to try to get images for all your items, but you seem to feel that it's a totally reasonable effort.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you really it's important to always work with your vendors. So
if you ask, they might provide.
Yes, they should. They have a catalog, right? Especially your top distributors.
Is there a way to automate loading this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Infor actually has a really helpful knowledge base article out there. And we have our emails at the end, so you can certainly reach out to us. But they basically have a self-contained workbook that helps automate updating those URL attachments to IC11. So pretty exciting. Try not to get overwhelmed. Utilize your vendors to grab some of this information in and know that there's some tools already built by Infor and available for you at your fingertips.
So then there's the other side of imaging, which is attaching things from your imaging system to your RQC, right?
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of this.
Yeah, so this is a customization that can be done and set up to integrate with your imaging software. So ImageNow or OnBase, whatever you may have in place today, for those special or service requisitions, or if you were in our bill-only presentation earlier, you may have some bill-only documents that you need to associate with the requisition as a requester. So here you can add that button in, have that additional setup, and then allow your requesters to associate documents with their rec.
So it looks, and by the way, associated with the requisition, and then it ties into the PO, and it's available to drill from the PO. Very cool stuff. Looks like we have some questions here. Any plans for vendor account number in AP10.2 to be moved to PO10.2? I don't know the answer to that. I can say that probably there's some thinking that it might make sense. You got to remember that PO10.2 is a subset of AP10.2. So there are many organizations that don't even use PO that process invoices. So I think that would be one of the limitations in terms of moving it. And even for organizations that are PO centric, like healthcare, there are a lot of vendors that are not PO vendors. So. Difference between punch out and punch in, I don't know what they mean by punch in. Is it the same thing?
So sort of. Good question. So there are some additional customizations that you can do with punch out. It's basically, at least for how I understand it, you're punching in additional information from the vendor and bringing it back in your system. So things like unspec code, really helpful information. The vendor has it. Why don't they send it to you? They can,
Yeah.
but where are you going to put it? That's not going to be available on that purchase order, so you have to map it to some sort of user field, right? So there's some additional customizations that can be done with the RQC config file and working with your vendor to help associate those two fields and punch that information in to your system.
I learn something new every day.
Yeah.
Can you limit what an RSS user can receive?
Yes, anything is possible. So
Love
there's a couple different things that you can do here, and the easiest way that I can think of that seems pretty straightforward is by utilizing your loss and security setup. So for these purchase orders, they have specific deliver to locations, right? So you could build a security customization that basically looks for the specific locations that they're able to receive for, and only those will display for them because they're available. So that's the most straightforward way that I can think of out of the box that might be helpful. You also could do, if they're the requester on the original requisition, only display those purchase orders.
All right, I'll let you choose if you want to take any more here.
Sure, yeah, bring it on.
Can you limit what an RSS user? Well, we just answered that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's still early here. It's just the second of the day. Does rec status work for custom approval flows? I mean, the answer is yes. It's default. If the custom flow requires additional rec statuses, that's a different type of question. And I would encourage you to come tomorrow at 4 p.m. And throw that one at Mr. Stout, Mr. Jeremy Stolfus, see what they answer to that. And we have seen it for customers that have added a button to RQC for uploading documents. Do you know if cloud customers can do this? What a great question. And I think it's one that we're going to have to defer to Richard Stout. I mean, I know in the process of migrating our customers to cloud, they try to contain some of the customizations that you can do. Specifically, they're trying to contain 4GL ones and what I'll call sort of front-end HTML customizations. I think anything that uses one of their tools or maybe Design Studio, then they would do so. I think that's one that we'd have to ask our tech team what they would recommend for that approach, but I'm sure there's got to be a way.
Yeah, and I'd say it's similar to the integration that happens with MHC today with creating beautiful purchase orders instead of just the
POs that look dope.
Yeah, POs that look dope.
There you go.
So I would generally think that if it's not outwardly approved today, they'd be working towards.
They'd be working towards it. Well, I mean, definitely in version 11 you can do the attachment.
Yep.
So,
7.
And 4 listens to you.
All right, master LBI.
Yeah.
So if you have LBI today, utilize it, please. So you may be using it just in HR and not in supply chain. Please use it for supply chain. So LBI allows you the ability to build some role-based dashboards, right? So you can utilize your report writer like Crystal Reports. If you have these queries that you run every single day to help you with item master maintenance or following up on POs, why not add it to a dashboard so that everyone can benefit from it without having to have a Crystal Reports license or know how to write these reports and query this information. So you can automate that by posting it to a dashboard. And here, not just focusing on running purchase order reports or running audit reports, you also can build some metrics. So utilizing some of those audit screens that we spoke about earlier to build some KPIs, and then having that to a dashboard as well for your supply chain management to have a high level view of what's going on in the system and who's working on what and at what volume. You also can do some report bursting. So this can be really helpful for expense reports, where you only want to give access to certain users for only their cost centers, their account units.
Very powerful bursting functionality to filter that out in LBI.
Yes, absolutely. And you don't necessarily just have Lawson data that you can pull from. Using these report writers, you can go as far as relating the Lawson information to other systems like your clinical system, like Epic, and kind of checking those two pieces of information together and making sure everything's syncing. So again, pulling all of these reports that you may have scattered all over the place and standardizing them and building these role-based dashboards can be really helpful.
One of the nice things about LBI from my perspective is that it's widely owned by the customer base, but maybe underutilized. And I know that very often when Stephanie goes on a client site and discovers they have it, she gets very excited because it's easy to deliver a lot of quick hits. It's usually up and running, it's in some level of use, and just building out some dashboards delivers some pretty immediate value. I do also have a quick plug before we get to the next slide that in an hour and 24 minutes at 1 p.m. Eastern today, we will be talking about InfoBI, what it means to Lawson customers and how it fits in with LBI. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, 1 p.m., rpic.com/webinars.
See you then.
Yes.
And then also as part of LBI is smart notifications. So these are also very exciting and I feel underutilized. This is basically a quick dashboard view into certain transactions. And you can do some really cool stuff with it. So this is actually a smart notification on PO23. So kind of what's stuck in queue, how long has it been there, and then here on the right-hand side, there's some dots built in. So red, it's been sitting there a while and something needs to happen to it. So really, really helpful. So these can be run on the fly, or you can also, like it kind of says, it can notify the user. So if you have requisition approval in place today and you don't want to email the approver every time they get something put in their in-basket, you could just have a smart notification run every morning to let them know all of the recs that are waiting for their approval. So pretty helpful. And then there's also, if you're utilizing Smart Office, there's a thing called watch lists. So if you have smart notifications enabled, basically, let's say you're doing some item location maintenance, you've added a new item, and you want to be notified when the last receipt date changes, right? Because it doesn't have one yet, and you want to know when it comes in. Yeah. So you can build a watch behind that, and then it will actually send you an email when it happens. So.
And quick question, so the bunny suit fits into the Christmas theme because of Christmas Story?
Yeah, okay. I think so. Not sure. So, and in this example here, this is what it looks like if the user were to get notified via email that a smart notification occurred. So this one here is a notification of inactivated loss in items. So again, if you're maintaining some kind of separate list, who actually needs to be notified as a full distribution list, this can be really, really helpful to bring that detail together. 8.
Attack of the X-type specials.
So, really most importantly is to look at your RQC config file. So, your requesters, if you have special service enabled and they're purchasing items, if you don't have warn enabled, it's not going to notify the requester if the item that they're trying to purchase is already built in your item master. So there's skip, warn, and deny. So again, one of the first things I check for working with customers, do they have it set to warn? And if not, please, right away, quick and easy. The only thing that you really should do is just add it into the instruction manual for the requester to let them know what kind of error is going to display for them. And basically it just says, we found an item match, please verify. And it will bring them to a different screen, show them those MMIS numbers that it matches to, and ask them, is this what you're trying to purchase? And in some instances it's not. It has a similar manufacturer number, and they're going to say, no, I still want to order it as a special. And then from there it brings them right back to the screen with all of the information still there, so it's not like they have to start from the beginning again. It's not like they have to adhere to the item master, even though we'd like them to. At least we're putting it up there. Mm-hmm. And then you have the second tier of trying to catch it. Yes. So having better management through PO23. So, again, you have your PO100 that's picking up those requisitions and turning them into purchase orders. But for your special items, you may not want those to automatically go to a purchase order. You want the buyer to manage them through PO23. And from there, they can view some of this information a little bit deeper before bringing it to the next step. And I think the last one is that sometimes you have people order specials because they're not in the item master. That's the whole point of specials. But you still might want to look for patterns, items that are getting repeatedly ordered that maybe should be added to your item master, or patterns of people that are continuously ordering the same item as a special that's already there. Mm-hmm. And another thing that I really like about this warn feature too is, like Keith was mentioning, having some sort of maintenance to go, how many times is this being ordered? Should it be added to the item master? you don't always get around to actually notifying the requester that this new item has been added, right? So by enabling this warn, it notifies them right
Oh,
then.
now it exists.
Yeah.
I don't have to type this.
Exactly.
And some people, there's a copy rec functionality as well, or
Yes.
people, yes. So
Yeah.
yes.
So it can be really, really helpful. 9.
Check yo matching. I get to talk for a little bit now. So, you know, I got two sort of high level things. Obviously, we could talk about matching for quite a while, and there's a little bit that is unique to each organization. There's a little bit that they have in common. Some have some high level processing advice, and then some specifics. Some specifics with some of the configurations that we see out there in the Lawson space. From a high level, conceptually, an ERP system, Lawson specifically or any, is going to have exception handling built in for your typical discrepancies that tend to be quantity or missing receipts or pricing. And it's going to be able to drive it as long as you can enter all the invoice information, right? So Lawson is it's a computer system. It's a giant database, even though now it might be something different. I don't know. And so it can do as much as it can track information for. And when you're building out what your processing is, I think it's important to distinguish between being able to get all the invoice data in, and I therefore don't need the invoice file or paper to know what the information detail is, and I can Lawson run with it, from I cannot get all this information in Lawson because the vendor's not valid, the PO is closed, the item's not on there, and then I'm going to need other mechanisms for dealing with that, right? Because if you can't tell Lawson what the item is, then Lawson can't go notify somebody else via a message or report or workflow. So typically, best practice, I would say, is to leverage an imaging system where you can route this information. By far the most efficient. It gives you tracking. It lets you get it to the right place. You know, for small organizations, it could be as simple as, you know, here's my invoices. I'm going to walk them over to purchasing. But, you know, I've walked in places where there's 50 different exceptions listed what they're going to do, and there's really kind of only 2. At the end of the day, it's stuff that I can push through Lawson because the data's in, and stuff that I need to, there's pre-entry stuff that I need to address, and usually that centers around either purchasing or AP. So just a high-level way to look at matching if you're rethinking a process, or as I hear often, you know, we have a lot of problems. I think that comes from leadership that sees how come we have such a backlog, and then say, oh, well, there's much invoices that need to be worked through, and then why is that so inefficient? From a configuration perspective, this is the match company, probably the most important configuration in matching. And there's one tab specifically. This main tab has GL accounts, which I think are important, but the messaging tab that dictates how things are going to behave in your organization. So one thing that's very useful is this PO cost message. 2 different types of buyer's messages, invoice messages in Lawson. One is produced when you force match an invoice and it is out of tolerance for any of the reasons that I listed before. And the other is this PO cost message. Now this PO cost message, if you have it active, is going to get created as soon as you enter the invoice with a different price than the PO. So it will create a message before you have receipts. And the reason this is useful is because sometimes you're trying to catch this price discrepancy before it comes through 200 more times. So if you're a EDI just in time, you got the same item coming in 30 times a day, and you're waiting for it to get matched to correct it, you could have 200 to correct it. So it's very nice. Sometimes when we start out new implementations, there's a lot that buyers are processing at that time, but mature organizations should definitely look at turning that on. The second thing is this service flag, and this basically says I want to create messages for service invoices, which I presume that if they're out of tolerance, you do. When we went from 9.0 to 9.01, I don't know the exact versions, they added some flags in here. And so a lot of us had this flag is yes, we want service messages, but Y became extended amount only, which is kind of strange because a lot of us use unit cost service POs, and we want to know if the unit cost is over or under, right? And so you want to make sure that this is flagged to be. So this might not have been a decision that was made consciously. This is just, it used to be Y and no, and the Y carried over. You probably just want to check it. And if it's not, you just flip it. You just flip it. It's not going to change anything in your system. It's going to change the way it's behaving forward. And then the third one, and perhaps the most importantly, is this recon match. This is the original type of message, which is when I force match in MA60.3, and there is this discrepancy, it's to create a buyer's message. And if this is flagged to yes, it'll create a buyer's message, and a buyer can address it. And if it's flagged to no, it won't. Here's what's really important. It is a company's decision based on their processes whether they want to employ these messages or not, right? So you can say, I don't want to use these don't work for me, I don't like chargebacks. And that's totally fine, I'm totally on board. But these flags set to no, what that means is that when I go to MA60.3 and I force a match, it's going to pay that invoice. And I've been to many organizations that have these flags set to no, and they don't realize that they're matching away all these invoices. They have high match rates because everything matches, everything pays. The vendor always gets paid. So I would check that. It's definitely something you want to change. And if you don't want to use them, at least it acts as a control to say, no, somebody should look at this first, or this is not your process. You need to go back to it. So definitely, if it was me, never know, regardless of process. And yeah, this is an example. Here we have cost discrepancy, 30 to 25. And this is from the RPI sandbox, where we have those flags set to no. And I think our next click is going to show us what happens when we match. It says matched. It's just going to pay. So there you go. That's how it works. You can test it out. And number 10.
IPA.
Woo!
So I really wanted to touch on this because IPA doesn't necessarily just need to be utilized for requisition approvals. So if you have a rec approval in place today, it's working well, you understand how it's utilized, all is well. However, supply chain can benefit from other types of process flows. So one that we've seen implemented that was really successful was one for MSCM exception management. So if you're utilizing MSCM for par counting today, I'm sure you're familiar with this process where your materials staff is doing all this scanning, they hit send, everything looks fine. However, what ends up happening is one of those items has an error. Either the account unit isn't active or it's missing a unit cost, and what Lawson does is it actually processes that requisition by creating a rec number and putting it in RQ10, but it keeps it unreleased with every other item except for the one that errored out, and you have to go into your par counting report in MSCM to find out what the issue was. So it takes your material staff to have to go into RQ10 or whoever's help managing Lawson and MMIS to look for those RQ10s and release them and try to fix the item. So here you can be really creative and build a exception management IPA flow to either very simply notify the requester and release the remaining, the OK requisition that was created, or you can go as far as, if it's this error, notify this user so that they can correct the record. So pretty cool.
Can you have it just delete the line and release the rest of the rec?
Well, the line's already deleted.
Oh, so
it
it's okay, got it.
Yeah, I don't get it.
Okay, got it.
I think the idea behind that is it's supposed to allow the requester a little bit more time
to add it back in.
To add it back in, but it just doesn't happen. And the material staff that's processing these recs, they're not using RQ10. They can go into RQC and find it there, but it's just not visible to them at all. So either just building in a notification or taking it a step further and actually doing some transactional updates can be really helpful. And another thing is that I would find very helpful is you have the over receipt buyer's message capability turned on in Lawson. But what happens is when the receiver does that over receipt, it gives them a small little status message that says buyer's message created. It doesn't allow the release of that receipt, and it just kind of sits there because the receiver missed it, or even if they didn't, they're like, hey, what's this message? And then the buyer's going in all of their match buyer exception queues and trying to find it there, which it's not. It's in PO52. So even if you do have a process and the buyer knows and the buyer allows
Checks.
the release of that PO52 message, it doesn't go and release the
Still
PO30
unreleased,
receipt.
yes.
So again, you can just be as simple as building in a notification flow, which Infor does provide to you delivered, but it just notifies the buyer. It wouldn't notify the receiver that it's now available for them to release. So here you could build a process flow, notify the buyer, but then once the buyer releases, release that PO30 receipt, or notify the operator that created this receipt record that they can now process it. So just a way to be creative.
Looks like we have a couple questions. Maybe a good time to hit them up here. Does enabling smart notifications require that the company use Microsoft Outlook?
No. No, it does not. It would just email whatever email address that you have built associated with that user.
And then we have a question about the KB article for mass load of item images. That's something we don't know off the top of our heads. We'll have to look it up. But yeah.
My email address is at the end of this presentation, and we also have questions at rpic.com. Feel free to reach out to us, and I'll send that along to you. We'll have to add it next time to this presentation.
There you go.
So everyone has
Always
it.
looking to improve them. So
and then
bonus. We got bonus.
Bonus.
Number 11.
My favorite, contract management.
Yes.
So
she won't present unless we let her talk about contract management.
So I thought this was important to add in because there's some really cool stuff that you can do with contract management, and it relates to all of these other projects that we have listed here, like Requisition Center. So if you have contract management in use, you actually can build specials on agreements. So that way your requesters don't necessarily have to use special service anymore. It's actually going to build it in your catalog. So that 20,000 item list for Synthes, you don't have to manage all that in your item master. You can flow that through your contract system. So here's just a view of the user interface. By each of these security roles, depends on what you see. So it's pretty easy to use and a little bit different than your normal S3. So it does take some time to get used to utilizing the rich client if you're not using Smart Office today. And it's highly customizable, which doesn't sound like a good thing with most applications, but contract management, any of these landmark-based applications makes it really easy. Change a label of a field, add a new custom field. So, a lot of different organizations are utilizing different contract management systems, and they're either web-based, they're not really customizable, they're
not integrated well.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe your legal department's using one, and your purchasing department's using another. You really can satisfy all those different areas and have special customizations just for those specific departments. And you also can personalize the views just like Smart Office if you're using that today. So pretty cool stuff. And then there's also Spreadsheet Designer. So these landmark applications don't utilize MS add-ins like your S3, portal existing setup does. And it makes it a lot easier, I think. There's not linking to fields that need to do, so you need to do the Control-Shift-O to find the F number that the data links to. Spreadsheet Designer, if you have the column title as the field name, it automatically maps it for you. Yeah. So it makes it a lot easier. And then from there, you can refresh the data. So you build this query, you hit refresh, and then you can be creative and build some automated pivot tables and pivot charts off of that and just refresh the information. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do. And we have a recorded webinar out on YouTube. You can access it through our website that goes a lot deeper into contract management.
And
what it
we'll
has
be
to
talking
offer.
about strategic sourcing, giving a brief overview of it at 3 p.m.
Correct.
Today. Looks like we don't have any questions, so maybe we have. So we have another perfect presentation, no questions at the end. I want to thank Ms. Stephanie Kowal for, first of all, doing this presentation. Secondly, for letting me participate. I want to thank all of you for attending. I hope you found it informative. Please follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, our YouTube channel. You can find our other webinars at our website under rpic.com/webinars. We hope you enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.